So please welcome back Daisy Ginsberg. I will have a talk with you two together because you know each other. You can come and stand next to me.
Should we take chairs?
Well, it's up to you. It's up to you, basically. I first have to ask, I mean, I did see, if you search for Christina on the internet, you will find a video where there's a program called The Doctors, and they bring out this cheese, and everybody go, ew, it smells so bad. But they're actually lying, right?
I mean, it does smell. But it smells like cheese.
But it doesn't smell like feet.
No, I mean, it smells like cheese, and some cheese smells like feet. So.
Yeah, all right. So but it was you ate it?
I did try some of it. So I tried the one that I made with my own bacteria, and it just tastes like normal chease.
Did you try that too?
No, cheese was made out of me.
It was the best one that we made.
The first batch when they first started the project back at Harvard, I was sampled and turned into armpit cheese, and that was really interesting for me because I've had to talk about this cheese so much, and I mean, in a way, I regret never trying it. But this question of what is in it and how you relate to it is something that, for me, I learned so much from this project, because kind of thinking of this relationship with your own body and this invisible world, and this cheese suddenly making that visible, and this world that you know is so powerful but so small. So.
This thing with synthetic biology and taking living organisms maybe and changing them or programming them and so on, but then you begin to think maybe they begin to evolve by themselves like we do, and then the thought springs to my mind that could this be the road to like the real artificial intelligence in the future, with something that we created but it's actually learning by itself? Do you think that's even remotely possible?
Well, it depends on what you're working on, I guess. So the bacteria or any project that you're working on is going to evolve, and it is going to change and it's going to adapt. And that's something that's really interesting. And I think one of the kind of thinking about it as design, the idea that your design would change after you've made it, not in a way that just like wear and tear, but could actually like renew itself and be different each time. I think that's a very different frame of mind for design. In terms of artificial intelligence, I mean, maybe you could say there's sort of a bacterial intelligence there, but it's not quite the same as a computer.
That's fundamental as well to synthetic biology. And I mean, my interest when I first learned about it about 7 years ago was this idea that these engineers were saying, well, we're going to make it easy to engineer and anyone's going to be able to do it. And that rhetoric has really changed over the time that I've been involved in the field. But again, this question of, well, if you can design it, what would you design, has affected me, but at the same time, the rhetoric within the field has been altered, and that synthetic biologists are saying, well, actually, we can't control biology in the way that we thought we could. And my interest has always been how this changes our definition of design, of the thing. You can't even design a thing, you can only design a context that something operates in. So often in synthetic biology, the systems that would be most robust if you're trying to design a biological hard drive, the way to make it robust and for it to basically to keep its design would be to design the context to select for something that's more likely to keep its design. So as a designer, that's fascinating for me, that you wouldn't actually design something, you design a system around it to make that thing more likely to happen and to stay in the way that you want it. And I don't know how, I mean, that's a lot of what I'm thinking about, is how do you design that system and what is the optimal way to do it. But I think it's much more, and that's where the cheese for me was so educational, because it was really thinking about context and much less about the thing itself. It's like our reaction to something.
But thinking when it's a discussion. This is when you begin to think about nature, and you think, well, we're already, mimicking nature in its many forms, and we're learning from it, and we're adapting it into our technology and some of it, like nanotechnology and so on. The little creatures that you explored, I mean, would we really need to make something like that, or won't it just be difficult?
I don't think it's a good idea at all, and I don't think it. There's many, many reasons why it's not a good idea, and that's, for me, part of the pleasure in the project was kind of going through and discovering those reasons for myself, but also experimenting with the design language around it. So a lot of the criticism is that it looks like I'm saying that synthetic biology could save nature. And my response to that is, well, that's exactly what synthetic biologists are saying. And they're complaining that people don't want, are saying that they're scared of synthetic biology, but it is, I mean, as with many new technologies, it is sold to us with this huge promise around it, and yet we're nervous or fearful of it. And the idea of releasing organisms into the wild, or technological organisms, as a technological solution to a load of other problems that we've made, to me doesn't seem like a good solution. Rather, we should be trying to put less bad stuff into the environment, because once, as the little girl in the gallery pointed out, like once you put the one thing in there, then what's going to clean up that one? And I was doing a thing recently with on the radio with a synthetic biologist from Cold Spring Harbor, and he was asked what he thought of this project, and he's engineering tomatoes, and he was like, well, I don't think it's a good idea with these big animals, but maybe microbes would be okay. And I said, well, why would you can't? How? At least with the porcupine, you could control it and you could see it. But why would releasing microbes to clear up pollution, engineered microbes, be any safer in comparison?
And we just experimented with moving animals that are not on one. In one country or one part of the world, to put them somewhere and see, we can do this, and then it just explodes and creates all kinds of problems.
But then again, it's this idea of this pristine nature is problematic in itself, and that is where the conservationists and ecologists are finding it difficult. So at this conference 2 years ago, one of the synthetic biologists stood up and said, our door is open, come and see us, but for God's sake, just cheer up. And well, if that's, it was quite depressing. Like, everything is terrible. We're killing everything. So how do we think about nature in a way that is less, that it's less pure and separate, and that somehow is part of a bigger context that includes technology?
Christina, your work is with the very, very small things like bacteria at the moment. What do you see as your next step? What could your experiments sort of become, or what are you thinking about when you're thinking a few years ahead?
Oh, a few years. Oh, I can't even think a few months ahead. I'm interested, I think I'm continuing to be interested in this idea of how do we relate to microbes. So I teach a class for designers about designing for the microbiome. So not just designing the microbes themselves, but designing kind of experiences and objects and things at a human scale that help us relate to microbes. So that's been a really fun experience for me too recently. So that's where I'm thinking.
But weren't you, I think I read when I was researching the two of you, that you had some thought that maybe in the future we would eat something that would land in our gut with like bacteria. And then when we got a disease, when we pooped, the poop would come out and be yellow or it would be blue, and that would signal that you had an infection that you needed to take care of. Do you think that that's a thing that actually could become real?
Well, that was Daisy's project.
Yeah, sadly, I'm responsible for the coloured poop future with my collaborator. But and that was working with students 5 or 6 years ago who were entering this so synthetic biology is more than a science, it's a movement. So it has a student competition that now 15,000 students have been through over the last decade from around the world. And it's a way that the field has spread itself to universities. So students design cool biological devices like that Hello World plate of bacteria I showed at the beginning. That's actually how I first met Christina, because I was at that competition with a little briefcase of coloured poop, and that was a critique of what was happening in synthetic biology and this machine metaphor. And from working with the students, we kind of came up with this vision of maybe around 2039 you'd drink it in a Yakult like yogurt probiotic, and it would be engineered, so medical sort of disease detector that you'd buy in the supermarket, which would transform healthcare. But it was intended as a critical intervention.
It sounded like a good idea to me.
I know, but this is the thing. It sounds like a good idea, and it's a problem with working as a designer in this way, and it needs to be. These are the things we're working on, is how these fictions travel, because. We set it in 2039 because we were saying maybe it would be technologically possible to make reliable engineered biology before then. I'm not sure if I would trust, something that could evolve to tell me my health, but that it would be culturally unacceptable until 2039. And so that was the provocation, was that it was so far future. And for a lot of synthetic biologists, they're like, no, this is a design goal, we're going to get there. And I go to synthetic biology conferences and I've seen that shown back to me as a design goal. And then last year, a paper came out of your old lab at Harvard making DARPA, it was a DARPA funded paper. So the American Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, which is part of the military, funded research into making engineerable E. coli to feed to mice to detect signals inside mouse guts so that they poop with a record of the chemical. And that was funded to protect American intellectual property in an emerging bioeconomy. This future is here. It's not coloured.
Scare you?
It does scare me a lot because it's not, the poop isn't coloured, so I'm not fully responsible. But it is internal surveillance. And I mean, there are potential great benefits to being able to engineer our microbiome for health reasons. But there's this other side to any technology. And what Christina was saying about it, it's not about the technology will save us, it's about the social kind of issues and ways we use it and the way we design the technology. So, the idea of surveilling poop is actually is quite a dark future for me.
So as soon as you talk about these things, a lot of ethical questions come up and a lot of thoughts of how are we going to use this and why and how will that affect us and how will it affect nature and a lot of scary thoughts, isn't it? Or I know that today there's like a phobia in the science world towards the public because we are scared of GMO and we are scared of a lot of things that scientists have actually developed. So could you tell us a little bit about that? How should we try to communicate in the future so we're not so scared of each other?
Well, the exo-womb example is an interesting one because this idea that there's this kind of very brash and brazen kind of approach that scientists have. It's like, oh, we'll fix this problem. I know the answer. I can do it. And that to me is very scary because it does bring up all these ethical issues. And of course, not all scientists are like that. And in fact, there have been really fascinating and important conversations happening around these complicated issues of ethics and society and how all these things are going to be mixed together. But at the same time, part of that kind of brashness is like, we can solve this problem. What's holding us back is that people are afraid of technology. And so, there is definitely a fear within the synthetic biology community that, like what happened with GMOs, that there will be a kind of a backlash and that society will prevent us from solving the problems as well as we could. And I think that that's quite short-sighted. And there's a paper that just came out by Claire Maris, who's a social scientist in the UK, and so she diagnosed this problem as synthetic biology phobia. So that we spend so much time actually worrying about people potentially being afraid that we don't actually have a good conversation to begin with because we're always starting from the point of view of these people are going to be hostile and afraid and we can't communicate on an intellectual level. So I think that there have been attempts, and I think a part of it is the role of design in creating spaces to ask these kinds of questions that are a little bit more difficult, that are critical. I think you can't come in as a scientist and say, I want to have a discussion with you. My project is good and forever, right? And we'll save the world. And if you disagree, then you're stupid, right? That's not a good frame of reference to start a conversation. But I think if you started with, this brings up really complicated ethical and issues, and we don't really know what's going to happen, and we want to talk with you about what your concerns are because maybe we share some of those concerns.
Has it become? I know there's a movement in the United States where a lot of people is actually questioning science, and you have a lot of people writing on the internet about vaccines are dangerous and so on, and it's something that saved a lot of people around the world. So how do you think there's a shift in society where we haven't communicated enough across the borders, or how shall we approach this situation? Because we're becoming divided into these two camps that are very distrusting of each other.
I think it's a really, really difficult problem, and there have been several different sets of approaches. So in the UK, we had sort of public understanding of science, which is this model of, the public are stupid. If we teach them, then they'll understand and they'll want it. And then that shifted into public engagement, which is we need to engage and be more let people be part of the discussion. But I think there is another way that still needs to be resolved. A lot of what I do, I describe as scientific engagement, is it's going the other way. It's I represent the public. I'm not a scientist. I'm not trained. But it's about creating, it's more than just one-way engagement. It's about a true dialogue. And I don't really know how it will work, but even in the show that Christina and Sissel, the Cheese, was part of a show I lead curated at the Science Gallery in Dublin last year, which is a great model, that institution, and it's now going around the world, the Science Gallery is franchising. But we actually built a laboratory within the exhibition, and that was the first thing that people saw. And lots of people said, well, I've never been into a laboratory before. And so we ran workshops and had the people who'd made the exhibits in the show came and spent a week in this laboratory, and it was a working lab. So part of it was about accessibility, but also realizing that, scientists are part of society. I think that the deal goes both ways, and this kind of exo-womb rhetoric, or the big, we're going to solve the world's problems rhetoric, is part of the problem. It's and it is that as big as we're going to solve the challenges level is that we don't know how to do it. So if we say science is going to do all these things and then we don't manage to, is it that you're creating an aesthetic of disappointment around science, or I think that there needs to be more dialogue and more willingness to fail in that dialogue, perhaps.
For me, I think that the biggest challenge there is this idea that there is kind of science and everybody else. Mm-hmm. And it's a very like us versus them mentality. So even when you're talking in the US about people who question vaccines, or people who question climate change, or people who don't believe in evolution, all of these different groups of people are get lumped together as people who are anti-science. So there's anti-science and there's pro-science. And each of those communities, even within science, right, like is many different kind of reasons and many different things are going on. And I think for the vaccine debate in particular, which has been really active right now in Southern California where I live, there's a huge measles outbreak because the vaccination rate is really low. But I think when you look at the reasoning that a lot of people give for not vaccinating, it's not because they hate science or they don't understand the science. It's because they've actually gone through a lot of information and trying to make sense of it as best as they can and trying to make decisions for their own families. So I'm very vaccines are great. Everyone should vaccinate their children. But I think it's important to understand where people are coming from, that it's not like a total disregard for everyone else. It's about, a feeling of wanting to protect your family, of seeing examples in the past of people saying, oh, this is safe, don't worry about it. The scientists coming in saying, everything is going to be all right, take this medicine. And then horrible side effects happen and bad things happen. And so it's a question of trust, I think. And I think when we set things up as us versus them, then you're already setting up for a mistrust. So I think to mend that is about, first you have to recognize the humanity of everybody and the diversity of opinions within the scientific community and within the public.
Thank you so much, Daisy Ginsberg and Christina Agapakis.
Thank you.